So 52 frames, week 17 was macro photography. Basically taking something really, really small and getting really, really close to it. It's not the exact precise definition, but for today's purposes it is. Being spring and having a fair number of flowers readily available, they were predominantly my focus. Most of these guys were just popping up in my backyard. Could get them at different zoom in, sometimes really close, sometimes a little bit further on. They almost become abstract at a certain point. When you get so close to it, you can't tell what the original object was. I had flowers at differing levels of maturity. Some were just ready to bloom, others had already bloomed and were in the dying phase, like this tulip. The azaleas had just started popping, so those were actually really vibrant and colorful right now. It had both pinks and whites and had a couple reds in the background, so I tried to get some golden hour, although my backyard's a little dark, a lot of tree cover, so I had to kind of time it so I'd get some light on the various flowers. We did a photo walk in Glen Echo, and that's where I was able to grab, I think these are bluebells, and I played around with the depth of field. So I started out with just taking the picture, and then I got them with the kind of background blurred out, and then so it was more obvious what the background was. So just playing around with depth of field. I think for these I knew I wasn't going to use them for the actual macro photo competition. These were more just to play around with the depth of field settings. I ended up going with this little snaky guy. This was in the caretaker's cabin. I guess when they rehabbed it, they had a metalsmith or something kind of embedded within the masonry, a number of steel objects. So there was a snake, I think there was a butterfly, there were a couple pieces of metal that had been formed to come out of the masonry, just little interest pieces. So even though I think the flowers were better pictures, I was pretty confident there'd be like 8 million people submitting pictures of flowers. So just to be different, I went with the snake. I intentionally used a very, very shallow depth of field, so that just right around his eye is in focus. I was doing this handheld. I was able to lean up against the building, but the snake's about 6 feet up in the air, actually a little bit more than that. So I'm basically standing upright with the camera over my head, leaning against this brickwork, trying to get as stable as possible. So I was really fighting the motion blur on this. Ideally, I would have had a tripod with a remote trigger. So I didn't quite nail the focus. Ideally, it would have been on the snake's eye. Instead, right now it's kind of at the back of his jaw. It was my intention to have the scales and everything out of focus, but they turned out to be a little more out of focus than I was really going for. But overall, it's okay for what it is. Definitely the flower pictures were stronger and prettier, but I thought this was more original. And that was the macro photography.